Okay, welcome to our final panel discussion on day one of Building Life Science Adventures 2023. As I was saying, thank you so much for joining the session, especially if this is your fourth one on the trot. So the topic of discussion today is going to be creating a good first and lasting impression, and we've got a really wonderful lineup of speakers with us today. Just a couple of housekeeping points before I introduce our brilliant panel. If you don't mind keeping your microphones on mute, that would be great. We're happy for you to keep cameras on, that's absolutely fine. It's nice sometimes to have a friendly face up on the screen. We do like these sessions to be really interactive, so if you can pop questions in the chat box throughout, that would be brilliant. And this session is being recorded, and all recordings will be made available via the app. Also, just to highlight that we do have closed captions enabled, so if you do require that accessibility, that is switched on. So our wonderful panel. So we've got Sookio, who is the agency founder and digital specialist for a company called Sookio, and they support all sorts of different companies that work in kind of life sciences and tech with on their marketing and digital marketing missions. We have Mair with us as well today, and he's a lead consultant for a company called MLNC, and they do lots of training, not just specific to life sciences, but something that I really like about MLNC is that they really kind of their mantra is accelerating learning into doing, which I think is brilliant. We have Yvette Cleland, who is an excellent role model for women in life sciences. Yvette has been supporting people on finding roles within life sciences for a long time now, and also really kind of championing ED&I and ESG alongside that. And we've got Jayne McLaughlin, who is director for George James Limited. Jayne has a background in research and has transitioned through many different roles and has worked in recruitment now for a number of years. Last but by no means least, we've got Chris Matheson, who is medicinal chemistry team leader at Domainex, which is a CRO and based in Cambridge. And yeah, we've got a really fantastic panel today. I'm going to hand you over to Sue now, and I hope you all enjoy the session.
Hi there, thanks so much for the intro. So so the topic of this panel is about creating a good first and last impression. And everyone on the panel today has got so much experience employing people, looking at CVs, covering letters, interviews, and everything else. And we all want you to do well. We've got so many tips to share that we really want you to take on board. So we're going to make it a very, very positive session full of lots of advice and as many tips as we can share with you. And we thought we'd take you through some ideas on CVs and covering letters, all the essentials, how to make a good impression in an interview. And then something that I think is sometimes underestimated is the power of making a good impression at the end as well. So it's not just about how you approach people about jobs and vacancies, it's what you do at the end sometimes can make you stand out compared to everybody else. So what we're going to do is go straight in and talk about CVs and covering letters. And just as well, on top of what Jasmine was saying, if you've got any questions that occur to you, just drop them in chat and then we'll pick them up, and we'll leave a good quarter of an hour at the end so that we can go through those. So rather than saving them up to the end, just put them in when they occur to you, and then we can pick out the best ones. So Jayne, I'm going to come to you first. So just tell me, thinking about CVs, how many do you think you see in the course of a month or a year? You know, how many do you see?
Because I get quite a few speculative CVs as well, I'm probably seeing at my level about 50 new CVs a month these days, and there are periods where I might see more depending on what activity is going on. I have been if I've been a recruiter for 30 years, I've been in roles in the past where, you know, it wasn't unusual to get up to 800 applications for a project back in the day. So yeah, I've seen a lot in my time.
And the ones that really stand out for the right reasons, you know, what are they? What are the ones that really stand out for you?
format is important, so that it's easy to read. First of all, don't try and cram too much in, do it in microscopic font, because it makes it harder to read. Layout is important. It's almost similar rules to doing a presentation, so you need to set the scene at the start of your CV, with your opening paragraph, which must be very relevant to the project you're applying for. And then I like to see something about key skills, transferable skills. And then depending on your age, sometimes a summary CV for the older candidates. For the younger people, then the start of the chronological information, which is current stuff first and then going to be more historical. Don't make it too long. Some people say 2 pages. I don't get too upset if it's 3. Anything beyond that should be very clear. It's an appendix. If you have got a lot of presentations or a lot of publications, then you can clearly put those in appendix. And the other thing that I say to people is never put something in a covering letter that you've missed out of your CV if it's critical to the role you're applying for.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No, that's really good tips. Would you say that's the same for you, Chris? What are those? Are there any common mistakes that you see people making that you might want to advise people against?
Yeah, I mean, to echo Jayne's comments, for Domainex ourselves, when we were doing our recruitment last year, it was technical staff that was reviewing a lot of the CV, so we didn't have a huge amount of time to be, scrupulously checking every little bit of detail. We probably had about 1,000 CVs come across our desks in the year, so each chemist, we were probably looking at it for no more than a couple of minutes. So it's really about keep it short and succinct. Help it kind of flow easily. So, good use of columns, bullet points, and really try and identify the key skills that we're looking for in the job advert, and highlight those as urgently as you can. Because you're looking at a CV for maybe 2 minutes and you want it to catch your eye. If we have a CV come across the desk and it's just a block text of black and white writing, it's really difficult to pull out the information that you kind of want, and you're probably going to naturally start moving on to a different CV fairly quickly.
I think for me, when I get CVs coming in, bullet points, I love bullet points, I love white space, I love lots of keywords. And one discussion that we're having, because I'm in the sort of creative industries as well as sciences, quite often we get sent CVs that have got, people give themselves a rating. So there's 80% good at Adobe Photoshop and there's 75% good at Canva. And I know it looks nice, but it's not so useful. Sorry, who just wanted to come in then? Was that Jayne?
Just one other thing that I say to people. I think it's better to write in the third person, because otherwise you fill the page up with lots of I's and, I have done this and you have done that, and you can add a lot more words that have no meaning that most of us will scan right over. So, keep it more succinct by writing in the third person.
That leads us on nicely to covering letters. And so covering letters, I'm wondering if it's a dying art. So in the last hiring out round for Sookio, we only had, we had about 150, 200 applications. Of those, we had fewer than 10 covering letters with them. And to my mind, a CV tells me where you've been, but a covering letter tells me where you're going. That to me gives it context and tells you why you're applying for this kind of role. So just to come to Yvette, what's your thoughts on covering letters? How valuable are they to you?
Well, I think they're invaluable. And if we go back to Chris's point just now, he had 1,000 CVs come through. How do you stand out with 1,000 CVs? So I would say a cover letter allows you to really stand out. It is a little bit of a dying art, but I think it's because access to applying for roles now is a lot easier than it used to be. However, if there is a role you really, really want, you cannot write a generic covering letter. It has to be something that is very much tailored to that CV and to the role that you are applying for, so that going in and actually looking at, for a start, the role that you're looking for, using keywords from that and applying that to a very concise and well-written cover letter. You're probably looking at between 3 and a maximum of 6 paragraphs. Again, I think somebody said it just now, possibly Jayne, don't include anything in that cover letter that can't be found or indicates to your CV. I think you have to use language that resonates with the person going to be reading it, possibly a hiring manager. So if you've really looked at the business and you understand their values or their employer value proposition, use that within the context of the cover letter as well. It will really make you stand out. Make sure all of your statements are positive about yourself and why you're suitable for that role, but always be authentic. Don't try and be somebody else. The interviewer needs to see you, or your potential interviewer needs to see you coming through that. Covering letters with quite action orientated points in can be really impressive. And you should always sound positive and determined, but not arrogant or desperate. So there's quite a nuance of language that needs to be used. But please be concise, and also please ensure that your spelling and your grammar is correct. The first thing that will make a CV perhaps not be looked at any further is a cover letter that hasn't got or has got spelling mistakes or is grammatically incorrect. So yeah, I think that would be my main points for that.
Yes, the two very much go hand in hand, don't they? How about you, Mike, when you're advising younger people about covering letters? You know, let's say they're looking at a blank sheet of paper and don't know where to start. What would you normally tell somebody?
Well, just back up and agree with everything that's already been said. But for me, you have to make the effort. So that would be my starting point. Oh no, it's covering letters. Not many people do these nowadays. They are really important to make a differentiator. So first thing, you have to make the effort. And as it said here, they need to be tailored. So if I'm going to be reading your covering letter, I need to see that you made the effort and you understand what you're applying for. And then the language it's used is all about confidence and desire. I can read it if you're not particularly confident about what you're applying for. I can also read if you haven't really got that desire, if you've just gone through the motions. Yeah, I'll just apply for another job. If you've got confidence and you've got desire, now you've grabbed my attention. And what's a differentiator from you? As we said, we're talking about hundreds of CVs. The covering letter gives you a competitive advantage. And if your covering letter makes me look and think, yeah, this is somebody I'm really interested in, and then I go into the CV and your CV backs up and endorses that, you're amplifying your odds and your chances. And of course, then there's a payoff for you because you've taken that time and effort, built your covering letter. Now you've got a real chance.
I think as well as a misconception that when you send in a CV and covering letter, it's going to be seen by this faceless organisation, huge HR department full of people that are just like robots. Whereas I think 99% of businesses in the UK are SMEs, and you've got lots of very small life science startups and people that care passionately about what they're doing. And even though it might feel to you that you're kind of sucking up to them somehow to say, well, I've looked around your website, I can't, you know, what the work you're doing is just so, it's making such positive impact. I'd love to be part of that, even though to you, you might feel like, oh, this is, you know, I'm going over the top here. When you're on the other side and you're the person running that business, you've got someone that's sending in a CV and covering letter that really, really shows passion and really understands what you're doing and has taken time to understand it and look around, then you know, you wouldn't believe what a difference that makes in helping you stand out. Whereas to you, you might feel that that's going in, you know, big pile of CVs. Everyone's saying the same thing, and it's not true. And not, you know, does everyone else feel like that as well? That, you know, maybe people don't realise what it's like on the other side of the table. You know, that's what we want to see.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Chris, yeah.
We did quite a heavy recruitment drive last year with Domainex. We almost doubled the size of our technical team, but we're still quite a small company. And so, you know, it's really important for us not just to hire technically gifted people, but also get the right people that fit into kind of what we're all about, feel like it's someone that we would like to work with long term. And just showing a little bit of personality in the cover letter, showing that they have, you know, read up about the company, are invested in what our values are and what our mission statement is, can really be the foot in the door that a lot of people need.
I've got two other little points. Yeah, two other small points about CVs. I see all too many CVs. One that aren't very well labelled when they've been saved. They're saved with some kind of code rather than the person's name. And it's a good idea to so your CV says your name on it when it's a saved file. secondly, I see an awful lot of people who write down the name of a company they've worked for, but tell me nothing about what that company does, assuming I know what every company in the entire world might do as their discipline. I spend a lot of my time having to look up whether people are relevant or not based on the organization they're currently working in. So a little bit of help saying what business your company is in is helpful. And the other thing, I see a huge number of CVs that give me a long list of what their responsibilities are and nothing about their achievements.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting.
And I'm going to hire someone because of what they can do, not what they've been asked to do as a job spec.
No, exactly. And just one other thought as well on the covering letters, that it is 2023. You know, your covering letter, it's a mechanism really for telling people more about you and where you want to go, given context. So it doesn't always have to be, I mean, I know we're talking in the context of a formal letter, but actually any sort of approach, whether it could be via LinkedIn or whether it could be looking at the company and looking at the person's email address, so it's not just going through the standard routes, or even recording a little video of yourself, then anything like this that gives context is just quite a different approach sometimes, which could work. Maybe not for everybody, but you know, anything that you can do to stand out is always helpful. So thinking about interviews, so I'm going to go to Mike here. Okay, so you've done a brilliant CV, lovely tailored covering letter that's full of enthusiasm and passion and understanding of the company. And so you've got the interview. And so what are those things that you can do to make sure it goes well? And yeah, let's go to Mike first on this one.
Yeah, I think the starting point is the preparation. You have to prepare. And the key thing they've got here is about anticipating and practicing the questions that you know you're going to get asked. And I think too many people go in and they just say, yeah, you're just going to go for the interview now. Practice, 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 because that will give you the rewards. It enhances your skills, your capability. Get a friend, a colleague, somebody in your family to help you. The questions that you're almost certain to get asked nowadays are, what are your strengths? It's amazing the amount of people who's almost stuck with that. Think about it. This is your time to not be modest, to talk about yourself with confidence. These are my strengths. Inevitably, you're also going to get asked what your areas for improvement, what your areas for development. So make sure you practice that one. One piece of advice we give in preparation is, what are the 5 dreaded questions that you think you're going to get? Practice them. You're also going to get the competency-based questions where you're going to ask to describe a certain time or a certain situation. And one of the techniques that I'm sure will come out in conversation is using the STAR model: the situation, the task, the action, and the reflection, and some people call it the results. If you've practiced that, and I would even say have it noted down in front of you so you can then talk it through. It's not a test, it's not an exam. Have that information there ready you can refer to. It shows you've prepared, and it shows you can, at moments when an interview, you maybe think, oh, I'm going to be lost for words, I can refer to that point.
Can you just expand on that a little bit more then? So say we're in an interview and I'm asking you, tell me about a time that you had to deal with conflict, for example. How would you use that STAR technique?
Yeah, so I would
got here, Mike.
yeah. So you think about, what is the situation? What did I do? So the STAR is the situation, the task, what action did I take, and what is my reflection and what is my results?
Okay, so it brings it to a positive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what I really like about that? It's telling a story.
Yeah.
We're all storytellers. We all sit and then we can talk to people and telling stories, but put that into practice in an interview. And if you use this STAR model, my son recently went for some interviews, and I had him to write down STAR on a piece of paper, and we talked about some of these key questions, and he prepared, and he was a successful interview. He went to 2 interviews, he was successful in both because he followed that process.
That ties in nicely with a bit of advice someone gave me years ago, which I've always stuck to, which is, before an interview, just come up with your own top 5. So a Chris top 5 or an Yvette top 5 of some of your best work, professional achievements. And that means that however difficult the question is. So if it's about a weakness or conflict, or, you know, if they ask you a question about something negative, it means you can wrap your answer around, you can turn it around. So actually you come out with something positive. So, you know, okay, so there was conflict, or it was about your weakness, but then, you know, you come out to something that was an absolute triumph. And that's great, because then you've got them just to hand. How about you, Chris? What are these things that you think help an interview go really well?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the majority of the interviews I've been running have been very much on the technical side of things. So for life science recruitment, one thing I would just say is take your time, don't panic. Nerves will get the better of all of us, but don't be afraid to take a little bit of time before you answer rather than jumping straight in. It's more than fine to ask for the interviewer to clarify the question. And if you don't know it, it's also fine to say, I'm sorry, I don't know that. You can always come back to a question later in the interview. It's not uncommon, especially if you're nervous, which is only natural, for you to freeze up when the question is first asked. Then later in the interview, the answer might come to you. That's fine to come back to it. What I would say is don't just jump in and blurt out the first thing that comes into your head. And if you don't know the answer, don't try and bluff it, because we can tell. Most of the time, I'm not looking for, this isn't an exercise in just trying to find someone with the best memory in the world. It's not necessarily about how, do you answer every single question perfectly right? It's how you go about answering those questions. Can you start to work your way around a scientific problem? And be honest if you don't know. It's totally fine. We're not out to catch you out.
No, exactly. I know, because we're gunning for the person on the other side of the table, aren't we? We want them to do well. We want them to be really good. How about you, Yvette? Any tips on how people can really make a good impression in an interview?
I'm going to go back to the beginning of the whole process and say face-to-face meeting. Make sure you understand what the dress code is. That's very important. If you're going into a formal environment, make sure you know to dress formally or informally. If someone says it's dress down, ask what dress down means to them. It may not be a hoodie and a pair of jeans, so just make sure that you understand that. Also make sure you absolutely know where you're going. Many businesses have several sites within a site, so make sure you know where, how, and how long it's going to take you to get there. The other thing as well, when I'm interviewing, I will often ask my team at reception, security, whatever, how did that person behave with you when they came in? And that's really important to me, because we're a very, very team orientated business. And when I'm bringing someone into our business culturally, I want to know they have those same positive values. So always be very mindful of how you are treating people on that journey in. Critically, always make sure you have a copy of the CV that you sent to the client and the cover letter, because if you're serious about the roles that you are applying for, you will be writing very bespoke, truthful, but very bespoke details to that, and make sure that you have that for reflection. I myself had an interview years ago where they'd lost my CV. So again, I was able to give them a copy of my CV when I got there, but it helps you prepare as well. Also, if possible, make sure you've got the job description, so you can refer into that. And whilst you're waiting to go through to an interview, make sure that you've got that there just to reflect on everything. Lastly, as well, not all interviews nowadays are held face to face. So if it's a Zoom meeting, make sure that you're prepared for that as well. I've had feedback recently with candidates we've had being interviewed that they were not making eye contact appropriately on Zoom. So little things like that as well, or Microsoft Teams.
That's really hard, isn't it? That modern challenge, and things like just checking the links work the day before and everything, I think is really important. And what you just said as well about making sure you got the location right, allowing enough time for a face-to-face. Years ago, I got the job as a project manager at itv.com. So it's in London, one of their HQs there. And first of all, my cab didn't turn up to take me to the station. And then traveling down from Cambridge to London, there was a cow on the line, classic Fenland challenge. But because I'd factored in enough time to get me there early, it was still fine, and I still had time to go for coffee next door and just kind of calm my nerves. So Jayne, I'm sure you've got lots of tips on all of this. I wonder as well if you've got any ideas on what makes a good question to ask at the end, as well as anything else that you might.
I've got a couple of other points I'd like to make before I go to the end. I think the most important thing is when you're going for an interview, do ask how much time you've got. How long is the interview going to be? Because if it's only a 30-minute slot, then you've got to be very concise with your answers. Otherwise, you'll have waffled your way through one question and not leave the interviewer long enough to ask all the things they want to ask of you. And so you'll leave an interview with an incomplete picture of what they wanted to gather from you. So I think that's secondly, it's very important to do your homework on who's going to be interviewing you. And that's a lot easier to do these days. Most of us have profiles on LinkedIn. So find out who's interviewing you, what their job title is, and look up their background so you know who's going to be interviewing you and what type of questions they might lead with based on that background. Don't be afraid to have some notes. You're going to have your job description and your CV with you. If you want to make some notes, some memory joggers for sort of some of the examples you might give to some of the, like, what's your weakness, what's your strength, just so while you're a bit nervous, it doesn't, just look down and just remind yourself what it is you're going to say under those circumstances. That's perfectly fine as well. And as Chris mentioned, never be afraid to have a few minutes of silence just to gather your thoughts before you answer the question. Don't feel you've got to dive straight in, within a second of the interviewer finishing the question. Taking time to have a clear answer is fine. And at the end, my old boss, always be closing. Ask for the order. Basically, you want to know when you leave the interview that you've satisfied the interviewers. So don't be afraid to say, have I satisfied you correctly? Is there anything you'd like me to elaborate on? It's, an interview isn't something that's done to you. You're part of the process. So it's quite all right to ask questions. And it's always a very good idea to come with a couple of killer questions. I've had many a hiring manager say the reason they chose someone because they asked a really exciting question at the interview.
I'd love to know from all of you, actually, what makes, can you give me one good killer question to ask at the end?
Now you're asking. Putting us on the spot.
I think for me, one that I think is really good is if someone says, what's a typical day in the life, on this job? And it's just really nice because it shows that they're already imagining them there, so what would I be doing in a typical day? I think that's a really nice thing to ask.
That's
Anybody else?
nice question.
How about you?
I would say, I think it's really important in an interview to try and find common ground with your interviewer. That's really, really important. So something you can ask, I think that's quite compelling, is why they joined that business. I think that allows you to engage in a slightly different level with that individual. I do also love the questions you were just going through, but I think something else as well that can be quite useful is asking the interviewer what their leadership style is. What would make you fit culturally into that team? I think sometimes people prepare questions that might already have been covered in an interview. So to have something that is completely removed from something that's likely to come up in that interview, for example, why that person may have joined the business, I think can be really handy because I think it can throw you off track. What you've prepared is already answered in the context of that interview.
And then you say, oh, I don't know, all my questions have been answered. Yeah. One that we've had recently is people say, what are you most proud of over the last 3 years? Because the last 3 years have been so tumultuous. And that, I've really thought, that's a really good question. And then on the flip side, the one that I've had a couple of times, and I don't know if there's some advice going around that this is what people should say, but it's a bit like Jayne was just saying, but a step further, which is, have you got any concerns about me in this interview? In which case, can I address them now? And I've had that twice, worded slightly differently each time. And each time I felt a bit, well, hang on, I need time to think this through, and I need to chat to my colleague. And, I wouldn't necessarily want to just blurt out something that I think is a concern to the person there and then. So I found it a little bit too far. I don't know about anyone else. What about Chris and Mike? What are your thoughts? I'll go to Chris first. Any killer questions for the end of the interview?
Well, I actually had one the other day that was that stopped us in our tracks a little bit, and I thought it was a pretty good question. Was just asking us what we thought the worst part of our company was, and
Whoa.
could come across as a little bit negative, but I would say the way they delivered it was actually was very good, and it generated quite a good bit of discussion. Obviously, you've got to be very careful about how you deliver a question like that, because you don't want it to sound too negative. And I just like a candidate to show that they're thinking more about how they're going to fit this company into their life. So we had a candidate talking about whether or not we do any social outreach and things like that, and just, you know, because it's more than just a job. You know, it's a significant part of your life, and if we can see that a candidate's really thinking about how this is going to be a long-term investment for them, you know, it's really, I find that very important.
Yeah, brilliant. And how about Mike? What are your thoughts on this?
I think the world of interviews changed quite a bit over the last few years. Gone are the days when it was the panel and it was all about the interviewees and the trying to put you under pressure and see if you crack and all those sort of things. People now are becoming far more skilled, and they want anyone who's coming for an interview to be successful, because it's their role to recruit the right and best person for their organization. So the mindset has shifted. And so think about this, it's not only they're trying to sell the business to you, you're trying to sell yourself to the business, they're trying to sell themselves to you. So if you're going into the interview, what would you like to know and find out? So be curious yourself, and then just see if that spurs a couple of questions. But the one that I think is the nugget is almost the opposite of your one, Chris. What is great about working here? And I tend to see that as a response, because if I'm interviewing and you ask me that question, and then I give that response, then I can also see the response of you. And if you think this fits, and I think a point you also mentioned earlier on, Chris, about the values-based. More organizations are looking at values-based. So if the conversation aligns values, then you're on a win-win here, aren't you?
Okay, and then what about, so following the interview, it's gone really well. Do any of you like some sort of follow-up as well? Like maybe Yvette, is there anything that you advise people about what to do after the interview?
I always thank people when I've had an interview. I've noticed quite often people don't do that, and it sort of brings quite a nice natural close to the interview. Also asking what the next steps are, so that you can be prepared for that as well. Depending on the type of interview that you've had and how engaged you felt, I think it's also very nice sometimes to send an email afterwards thanking people for their time, and to just reconfirm how incredibly keen you are on the role. That's such a nice touch, and it very rarely happens nowadays. Finally, I would just say that the biggest way to leave a lasting impression is everything that you've done in an interview, from how you've submitted your CV, to how you got in front of that person, to turning up on time, being authentic, using positive body language, and being very open in that interview. Leaving an impression isn't about how you close that interview out. It's about every single step that you've taken in that process. And then there's some nice ways that you can seal the deal by sending a really positive thank you, or thanking the interviewer at the end.
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan of that as well. You know, good old-fashioned manners. They just don't go out of fashion. And one thing I find, I'll always email people, and the people that don't get the job, I'll send them a nice message and say thank you so much. It's so lovely to meet you, etc., etc. And yeah, more than half the time people don't respond to that. But the thing is, what they don't realize is that I've got people saying to me all the time, oh, do you know someone that's got these skills, or is a really good digital marketing person? And on a number of occasions, loads of occasions, I've said, yeah, this person that I just interviewed, he or she was brilliant, not quite the right fit for this role, but I love their attitude. And I've forwarded people on who've got successful roles elsewhere. So it's just like you're saying, it's not just about what happens there and then, it's the before as well and the after. What about you, Jayne? What are your thoughts on leaving a lasting impression?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to the people. A lot of people leave the interview without asking about next steps and what the follow-up will be and when. And those, you know, and because so few people do, that if you do it, it's part of being remembered. I get so rare, I get a follow-up email after an interview, even at senior level. So I think if you do it, you know, you will stand out, because so many people don't think they need to. You know, and it's also a chance to just reiterate how you feel you're appropriate for the role. Don't make it too long, but it doesn't hurt to just reinforce any key points you feel you want to reinforce from the way the interview had gone. And say and if you don't hear in the timeline, I don't think it's wrong to just follow up once more and say, you know, I'm still really keen. You know, I thought I believe I was going to hear by last Friday, you know, and sometimes there are delays and people do forget and people get very busy. And it shows your keenness. You know, as long as it's polite and it's concise and it's not rude or pushy, you know, just think about your wording. Just be very careful when you're writing these emails that you really read them, even get somebody else to read them before you send them, that they have the right emphasis, because it's very easy to create miscommunication when we're going too fast.
Absolutely. And it's interesting what you say about, I suppose, not being too pushy, because the very fact that a company is hiring often means that they're under a lot of pressure. You know, they've got a gap in the business they need to fill. And then quick, we've got to get this person, they've got to train them up. And sometimes you don't send those follow-up emails until a few days, you know, later than you'd like, but you'd be dealing with the here and now first. So yeah, sometimes if there is a delay, there's a good reason for it, even though as employers, ideally would be, you know, being the perfect communicators as well. How about you, Chris? What are those things that you can do to leave a positive, lasting impression at the end?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really reiterating everything we've kind of already said in the session, and you guys have already mentioned that you can really tell the candidates that have done their homework, they've catered their application to this job. You know, maybe it's a little bit needy of us as a company, but you know, it's good to feel that they're invested and they're enthusiastic, and that shines through by just the level of efforts that's put into a good quality cover letter, that the CV has been catered towards us, that you know, you've done a bit of research about the company and you've come with some questions that you have, or some comments on some of the work that we've done or something like that. And you can really tell, you know, as I say, if a candidate's invested, it shines through every phase of the interview.
And what are your thoughts then, Mike? You know, those ways that people can really leave a positive, lasting impression?
I think it's just, again, building on everything that's been said, this is not easy. It's not easy to do everything right and be successful. So you have to make the effort and you've got to continually learn all the time. If you've been at an interview and you've come away from it and you've really enjoyed it and you really want that job, I think a good touch would be to go back and thank for the interview, and that you've really enjoyed it and you're really interested and keen. I know on occasions that's been a game changer, because that has come back in, all right, this person's keen, and that's put them front and center of my mind, and that's been somebody that other opportunity. The other thing I would say is, because it's not easy, if you're unsuccessful on this occasion, I'm a great believer that if you surround yourself with feedback, you can only get better. So ask for feedback. And as you said, Sue, that it may be it's not this time, but that person may come back for an interview in the same organisation in a year's time. They've improved, they've grown, they're better. Or you may actually indicate there's somewhere else that they can go. It's all about the reputation that you leave at the organisation. If you demonstrate to me that you're learning and you're really keen and you want to get some feedback to make yourself better, then I'll remember you.
I think, you know, building on that as well, specifically within life sciences, it's a small world. You know, a lot of us know a lot of colleagues, or, you know, we might move to other companies and being involved in the recruitment at that stage, and leaving that lasting impression of being enthusiastic, polite, doing your homework, and really putting a lot of effort into your interview we'll remember that. And if we connect on LinkedIn, maybe, you know, we'll have a connection in common in the future. People have, you know, good memories about top quality candidates. And as you say, if it's not right for this role, we may know someone, or we may be hiring in the future. So just hit all the, you know, hit all those points right during the interview, and hopefully it'll work out for you next time.
I think that's really, really good advice, because as employers and business owners, you're always thinking several steps ahead. So in life sciences in particular, you might be thinking, right, well, we're going for this next round of investment. So when we hit that point, then that's when we're going to be hiring more people. So even if, yeah, the person in front of you isn't quite right now for this role, what you really want to tell them, but of course you can't, because you know there's so many moving parts, is, but in a year's time we can have a role for you. So if that person, you know, makes a positive impression, follows up, is polite, friendly, and all those steps, like Yvette's saying, along the way, then, you know, you never know, you might get that phone call in a year's time. And you know, you can still be brought into that company. So it's really, really important. So should we see if we've got any questions from you often hear that you should, this is from Pernilla Carlson, you often hear that you should ask about feedback, but what kind of feedback would that be? Yes, what kind of feedback do you all give? Jayne, do you give people feedback after an interview, and in which case, what kind of things do you tell people?
I tend to be, I mean, obviously I'm dealing quite often with more senior people, and I tend to be incredibly honest. You know, there's a lot of the superficial feedback that you will get sometimes is just, oh, well, somebody else was a bit better. I think as employers, we need to do our best to be constructive with the feedback. And Mike, you can say some of the things about some of the things that you tell people. But you know, if they've messed up, if it's just purely down to chemistry, I will tell them. Not everybody's going to be, you know, suitable for every environment. But if they've, you know, if I find out that they've not answered a question correctly, or they turned up wrongly dressed, I mean, all of the things we said about what you should do, you know, candidates will do the exact opposite of what they should do. If they've asked an inappropriate question, if they weren't prepared, if they were late, I will tell them all these things. You know, there's no point not being honest, because otherwise they'll make the same mistake again. But the most important thing when I've done the feedback is I do remind them that however many times you get knocked back on interviews, you've always got to face the next one with 100% positive mental attitude, or negativity will be picked up and you will not be successful ever.
What about anybody else? What kind of feedback do you give on interviewees when they ask for it? Yvette, yeah.
Something I get given feedback on when we've got candidates out for interview, and something I also find frustrating when I'm interviewing, is a waffler.
Yes.
So, I believe that Mike's, when he talked about that STAR technique, if you can keep that in your head, situation, task, action, result, it will help you to be concise. And then at the end of that, to actually ask, have I answered everything that you expect of me? Is there anything else that I can give you detail on? I do come across a lot of wafflers, and we try to coach them. And Jayne, I think honest feedback is very important, but also some coaching. But I get that myself, and I also get it from employers quite. So something really to watch out for. And if you get that feedback, go and ring Mike and ask the STAR technique.
One thing I'm interested in, so I mean, I work in communications with life sciences, but my background is not a scientist myself. So I'm just wondering if anyone's got any thoughts on what makes interviews in life sciences different to, you know, to other sectors, to other industries. Are there any particular challenges that you tend to give people, or practicals, or I don't know if anybody wants to answer this, but I'm just wondering, yeah, are there any tips that we can give that might be a bit more specific to this sector, to this industry? Chris, you possibly look like
it's a slightly tricky one. I mean, one of the ways I would say that a life sciences interview might be a little bit different. So certainly the way that we've been running them is we'll have our science technical as our first round, and that's before you get to any kind of HR or personal interview section. So it's tough, because some of the things we've spoken about in terms of the questions you might want to ask your interviewer, or some of the key questions that people might be asking you in terms of, you know, what are your strengths, or what's the situation that you've dealt with conflict. That would come after we had done a technical interview. So I guess, again, it comes down to doing research about the company and trying to find out as much as you can, or, you know, with what little information that they're probably putting online, what kind of work they do, and identify any weaknesses that you feel in your technical expertise, and just try and drill in on some of that. Now, it's not uncommon. We've actually, from time to time, had candidates who were, you know, doing pretty well at, say, 70% of the technical side of things, but we're a little bit weak on another. It's not uncommon for us to call them back for another one. So if you have a technical within the life sciences, and you feel like there was an area you stumbled, if you get called back for another, really try and focus in, be honest with yourself, and try and focus in on the areas that you felt like you stumbled, because there's a good chance that that interview might be bringing you back to try and probe those areas of weakness again.
What about you, Yvette? Any kind of sector specific advice you've got?
Something I think is slightly more common, particularly within larger pharma, global pharma, is the possibility you will go through either psychometric or verbal and numerical reasoning, or God forbid, both.
Right.
I've spoken and coached candidates before that think they're going to get in and cheat a psychometric. Well, number one, why would you want to? You have to make sure you're right for an organisation. An organisation needs to make sure it's right for you. So it's a two-way process. You should never fear a psychometric, and you should always just be very honest with them, but be ready for them. The same with verbal and numerical reasoning. A lot of that now tends to happen online prior to the interview, which is a little bit better than when I first worked in the pharmaceutical industry, where you were literally sat in a room before you went into the interview thinking,
Exactly.
I've forgotten everything, I can't do this.
Panic.
One of my clients runs a battery of tests which last about 3 hours. It's quite intensive. It's quite nice. They give very good feedback to the candidates, and all the candidates that have done it seem to quite enjoy it. But it's quite a commitment from the candidates for a 3-hour session.
Yeah,
And
But most of it's on like,
the HR stuff.
yeah, they do it between the I've done an interview, the client's done a first verbal interview like we're doing today, like a Zoom or Teams, and then they do these psychometrics and other tests before they go to their face-to-face. So they do it on the candidates they want to invite for face-to-face interviews. And it's a very long psychometric, and it's a sort of spatial awareness test, and there's actually like a team test that they do, and they put together a battery of quite big company, so they put together 3 or 4 candidates for different jobs. So the last one, my German candidate last week, was on a call with a Spanish guy and an English guy from other jobs, but they then do this teamwork assignment that's assessed. It is quite comprehensive. Everybody seems to enjoy it.
I think this is why it's so useful to plan your killer questions at the end, plan them in advance, because by the time you've been through 3 hours of questions and then you have an hour-long HR interview, you know, by the end of it, if you're still standing and you haven't completely lost it, you know, it's quite incredible. So to plan how you're going to wrap up before you even go in, I think is quite clever, because otherwise you're just going to be mentally exhausted. Yeah, Yvette, yeah.
Just again on the subject as well, I find something slightly more common within our industry versus others as well are assessment centres for finding. Yes. So bringing in that verbal and numerical, you may also be invited to an assessment centre or a panel interview. They are both very different things, and they can be, for the uninitiated, quite a scary thought process. I have known candidates to say, I'm not doing that if it's an assessment centre. Assessment centres can be really useful. They can be a really rewarding way of being assessed, and particularly amongst your peer group and things like that. So we should never fear them, but you should be ready for them. You should understand exactly what's happening in them. Is there an in-tray exercise? Is there a group exercise? Again, making sure if you're going to have to present, make sure you know that company website inside out and upside down, or your therapy area, scientific expertise is geared in the right direction. And again, there are some wonderful resources you can use to go in and actually do a little bit more research, just to make sure you're getting yourself in the right zone.
We'd love some more questions in chat if anybody wants to pop them in. And in the meantime, question for Mike, because I know you do a lot sort of supporting young people with their careers and that kind of thing. So let's say, you know, it's a tough job market out there. It's very competitive. Let's say you've had a few knockbacks from interviews for whatever reason. How do you psych yourself up for the next one and kind of, you know, brushes everything away and get in the right mindset for your next interview if you have had a few knockbacks?
I think the reality is that there will be knockbacks because it is a competitive world. If we think about the numbers of people who we can get for a CV, and then we've got to whittle that down, and then you've got to get the people for the interviews, and then, okay, so it's tough, it's difficult. And as I say, a great believer in surround yourself with feedback. You can only get better. So find out what it is, if you can get that feedback, because that helps. Practice, practice, practice. So if you can then be really self-critical of yourself and think, well, why didn't I get it? You may get that gut feel yourself, I wasn't particularly comfortable with, or they just didn't come across so well, or they asked me different questions. Use every one as a learning point, and then practice to make it better the next time. Ask for help. When I say practice, your friends or colleagues want you to be successful, so practice before. And you just take each one as a learning point with that little incremental improvement each time. I would also say that where I see success coming more, and interesting with the life sciences, I've got a 3-point success criteria. Number one, you've got the track record. So the fact that you're coming for an interview would indicate that you've got a track record. You've got something of interest. The second is looking at the strategic fit for the organization. And the third, going back to the point that Chris mentioned earlier, is about the cultural fit. Understand the values of the organization. And lots of people now do more recruitment on the essential transferable skills rather than the competencies. So make sure that you give equal balance. Demonstrate your skills and your capabilities and your competencies, but also your values and about you, the authentic individual. And that comes across loud and clear.
That's really good. And Jayne, so what are those things that to you make you realize, okay, this is the right person for this role?
Do you know what? I still use my gut sometimes. I know I probably shouldn't say that. It's particularly when I do the first telephone interview, how somebody comes down the telephone line. The energy, the enthusiasm, the passion for what they do, versus somebody who's very dry and very labored and no animation in the voice. I mean, these things make a difference. Concise questions, as Yvette said, waffle. Anybody who waffles, I'd rather ask somebody for more detail than them go on and on and on. And you switch off, you lose the thread of what they're saying. And practice. I always say to people, even if you're a technical person, practice what I call your elevator pitch. Be able to give a succinct summary of who you are in about 30 seconds. So you can set the scene. And that can be that, just learning how to do that, how to give every element of what you want to get across in an interview in a succinct way. So you've really thought it through. What are the most critical things to say? Those when I'm doing a telephone interview, I usually tell them how long we've got. I offer that before we start. But that should tell people roughly how long they've got to answer each question. And if someone's going to take 20 minutes to answer the first question, we're not going to get to the end of the interview. So yeah, succinct answers, and just think about the way you speak and the pace. I don't want somebody who's gabbling too fast, but I don't want somebody who's really dry and slow either. I want to feel there's an energy to them, particularly as most of the time, I'm probably 80% of the time I'm interviewing for SMEs where, it's an entrepreneurial, dynamic environment into which they're going to go, even if it's a pure scientific job. even if, you know, even quality engineers, I want to see there's a passion in what they do.
I think it is very hard, isn't it, when you're nervous, not to gabble too much at the beginning. So maybe just have a quiet word with yourself before you go in and just say, you know, I will take this slowly, because it's really difficult, isn't it? One question that's come in about, so with modern forms of communication, so email and Zoom and social media, maybe Chris, some tips from you on how to make a good first and last impression, you know, through these other more modern channels.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one thing I just want to reiterate on what Jayne was saying as well. For sure, you can get a gut feeling about someone when they are charismatic and confident, assertive, and to the point. And it's tough because you can't just tell someone be more confident. But really, this highlights everything that we've already said today. Preparation and practice will give you that natural confidence that you know what you're ready to say, you know what you want to talk about. And you'll just come into the interview much less likely to just blurt something out. Anyway, so that was quickly touching on that. Yeah, for sure. Obviously, you know, it's 2023, post-COVID. We're doing a lot of online interviews nowadays, and it can be quite difficult. And again, this all comes down to practicing again. Try and find a colleague, a family member, a friend, someone like that, to practice your setup. Make sure that, for example, if it's a Zoom or Teams invite, you can, you know, practice setting up a meeting and connecting to it, making sure that the connection runs smoothly, people can hear you okay. They can pick up any, you know, for example, any little ticks that you might do that you don't realize, you know, you're doing fidgeting and things like that. What's in the background? Use blurred out backgrounds, or use the superimposed backgrounds that you can use, and just practice it. Because you might have an interview where the first 10 minutes is an issue with connectivity, and that's fine. We're not going to judge someone down on that, but you only have a finite amount of time to really show the interviewer that you're the candidate for them. And if you lose 10-15 minutes through connectivity, it's not a great start. And you don't want to come out of it thinking, I had a few killer lines that I wanted to get across there, didn't quite get around to it because I couldn't connect to Zoom.
It's just going to add to the stress, isn't it?
And I've seen some classics. I was interviewing one girl, America girl, and she was in her living room, and her husband came out in the background, and he didn't have any clothes on.
Fantastic. Well, I think we're coming to the end of the session. That's a really good point to end. Hopefully that hasn't happened in this session, so that's all very good. Or maybe some people might have liked to have seen that, I don't know.
Shut your dog away.
So thank you so much, everybody. We're sharing details with everyone else as well, are we, Jasmine, so they can, you know, follow up with anyone who they know has got loads of advice. I'll pass back over to you, but thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was such an informative session, and yeah, please do reach out to our panelists from today and from this morning's sessions. We've got some time this afternoon for you to be able to partner, and you can meet and book in meetings via the app, so please do make use of that. We will be back tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning for our next panel session, and that's going to be on the topic of which recruiter should you choose. So now that we all know how to boss the interviews, we can learn a little bit more about which recruiters to reach out to. So thank you so much to our panel again, and Sue for chairing, and everybody that joined today's session, and we look forward to seeing you back again tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye. Thank you.